sailors began to bury the second crate. The captain stood on a hill of slopping mud, looking down on the men and the burying of the loots. Just then, a splash of mud splotted up from James' shovel, hitting one of our shipmates in the face. The black sandy mud was on the face of the man to the left of James. James looked at it and saw that it was moving. The man wiped some of it off while the men shoveled. A loud blast of screaming fright came out of the man. He showed it to me and James as he trembled out of fear. It was not dirt, nor sand, nor any natural thing. No, it was living. It appeared to be thousands of extremely small, black crab-like insects. The ground was not ground. It was an infinite amount of these creeping things. One of the superstitious men cried out, saying to the captain that this land is from the abyss risen up by Satan. When the captain seen the fear it brought over some of the men, he quickly pulled out his sword and sliced the man's head off for speaking of such madness. The men quieted quickly for fear of being next on the chopping block. The blood sprayed out from the now dead man into the rain-drenched hole. Me and James continued the burial of the crate. The men at the other hole shouted, "It's gone! It's gone, damn it! It's all gone!" Killian marched over to them furious with rage. Me and James looked over briefly to see what was the matter. Just then, we saw something so eye-opening that we could not believe it with our own eyes. A blast of smoke came out from the hole as Captain Killian and the men backed away. Killian fearlessly walked back to see what had happened, and then it all went to hell. One of the men walked over to the hole with the smoke spraying up from beneath. He suddenly screamed in terror, "It's hot! It's hell risen!" Me and James walked slowly toward Killian, only to see the ground around the hole moving. Killian pulled his sword. He prepared for a fight. Then the ground all around the smoldering hole began to sink slowly like quicksand. Killian and the men moved back even more as the ground shook and sunk more and more. The rain poured down harder and harder. Two of the men ran into the woods toward the ship. The captain said, "Grab the crate from the other holes and take them back to the ship now." Me and James went back to the hole where we had been burying our treasure crate. It sunk into the ground, and now it was gone. Nothing left but a black hole. Then all at once, there came monstrous creatures sloppily crawling up out of the treasure holes. The men briefly froze in fear as the things came out of the pits of black living ground. They were likened to fishmen, creatures with fish faces, huge strong arms and legs. They stood 3 times the size of men. They had webbed clawed hands. They were coming from the ground all around us. Men began running to the ship, but some men were snatched up from some kind of black creatures with long arms hiding in the dead, lifeless trees. I ran too as I seen Captain Killian attempt to battle one of those hellish fish demons. Killian slashed at its arms, but was unable to stop it before it ripped his arm off. Then the beast bit him in two. Me and James ran out, away from the trees, and to the beach. But as I ran, I heard James cry out as the fish monsters got him. All I could think of is getting back to the ship and dropping one of the small boats down and fleeing this island of madness. My heart beating rapidly and my mind racing. I ran down the beach. My life began to flash before me. The night my wife and son burned up in the house. The hatred I had for myself. It was my fault. All of it. If I had not come home late that night, drunken, and dropped the lantern on the porch and passed out in the yard, it was my fault, I tell you. I was the one, out of sin, who ran from the God of my sweet Marilyn and my boy, Daniel. God of the heavens, I deserve this. I deserve death in the blackest abyss. I ran from you, and now I'm lost. Yeshua, if you're real, take me now. Take my life. If the Creator can hear me so far from the world, take me now. I give myself to you. Tears poured down my cheeks as I ran closer to the ship. I was broken, shattered into a million pieces. My mind overwhelmed and fear overtaken me as I cried, God, please take me. In the sky, giant metal shields spinning, like wheels floating, like they were just hung there. As they moved closer, I looked back to see creatures of all sorts climbing out from the ground and in the rain and in the mud. It was too much. I gave up. God, if you exist, take me. That light, sunlight, warm, dry wind, scent of summer, in and out of consciousness. I recall little bits. A light from above, cutting through the morning hazy rain, through the fog, through the hell that is this place. The silver floating shields, forced to go back into the sea. The two men of light with shining bronze like feet carrying me as I stare down in and out of a consciousness. Who were they? Did God send his angels? I'm in a small boat in the Atlantic Ocean. My name is William Davis, the sole survivor of the Tide of Dagon vessel. If you find this letter in this bottle, please do not go to that mysterious island with black sands and dead trees. You must stay away from that cursed place. God help us all. Well, I hope you enjoyed that story. It's kind of dear to my heart, I guess, so I'm hoping it didn't offend anybody too much. And I hope that my reading wasn't too, over the top or whatever. I'm not sure. It's the first time I ever read an audiobook. I kind of was laughing sometimes when I heard it a little bit, because I was like, man, I sound terrible. I'm not a fan of how I sound, so I'm hoping some of you out there actually didn't think it was too crazy how I read that or whatever. And a lot of the sound effects and audio, I had to put all that into it because I see stories as like movies, so I really wanted to give that kind of movie feel to it. I think if I would have had a little more time, I could have probably made some of the sound effects even more realistic. But for the most part, I'm happy with what I did with it. I think it sounded pretty good. The story basically is all about a man running from God. He commits a terrible act. His wife dies because he comes home drunk and he drops his lantern on the wooden porch or whatever and burns down the whole house at night when they're sleeping. And then he just runs away because he had nothing left. How many people actually do that? In day-to-day life, we commit sins. Even I do. I sin, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, great. I feel so guilty, and you feel like the first thing you want to do is you want to run away from God. You don't really, you don't pray to Him right away.
because you feel guilty for the sin that you committed, because you should know better. That's kind of how you feel. But in reality, you're just like, oh, I ruined everything, And even I get that way. Sometimes I feel like I've sinned just too much in my life. It's just like, my God, how can I get to heaven? I mean, I'm such a terrible person. I'll catch myself like swearing or whatever and just saying stupid things. And I'll be like, God, what is wrong with you? Why do you have to be that way? Or my wife will remind me, hey, you know you're a Christian, right? My attitude sometimes, and I'll have to go, what is wrong with me? So that sucks, but that's the really reason why Christians need Jesus. We don't need him because we're perfect. We need him because we are sinners. The original version of this story was a lot different than this because I wrote it from when I wasn't really into Christianity or wasn't really reading the Bible. So it was kind of like, it just didn't have a heart. It didn't have a feeling. And I wrote this originally when I was listening to a lot of H.P. Lovecraft audio stories. He has a lot of short audio stories. I did a whole 2 episodes on that, so I'm not going to get into H.P. Lovecraft. But it's basically me tying in all the things that I was into around that time, like ancient aliens and like UFOs, and a lot of UFOs are spotted coming up out of the ocean. So I wanted that to be in the story because I put that in there on purpose for the reason of that down the road, if I wanted to write another story, I can deal with that because I have some other elements, ideas for other stories in this same universe that ties into this event that happened. I just wrote this as basically a starting point for what could be a little universe that lots of characters could live in. And little short stories can all kind of bridge together a giant picture where you get to actually see what's really happening. And those UFOs that happened at the end right there, the shiny metal wheels, because that's how a pirate would probably describe it, because I don't think he has any kind of technology knowledge. I wanted to put those in there because of there's other elements that could play here. And they had to go back down into the ocean, which is really interesting. And that kind of ties into what people really see today with UFOs flying into the ocean. It's like they have a base under the ocean or something. Or maybe there's a hollow earth, and maybe that's where they're coming from, which could be true, I mean, all of these things are options as far as I'm concerned. And the UFOs are not good in the story. I don't know if I conveyed that very well, but they were forced back into the ocean, so therefore I guess that does sound like they were not good, and they were kind of coming toward him. And all these fish creatures, it's kind of like an H.P. Lovecraft story, because he always included fish monsters and the ocean and the vast things that could be living underneath it. And I really like that element. That's a really interesting element to me. I don't know about it to you, but to me that's really interesting that there could be some kind of alien or whatever, old creatures beneath the sea. So I just thought, well, if this island was out there in the middle of nowhere, this mysterious island when the world was not completely discovered, that if someone might have come across this mystery island, there might have been something different there. And plus it's kind of like there's things coming up out of the ground, like, demons coming out of the pit. And I wanted to put that element in there too, because that's kind of a big part of it too. I really wanted to also tie together this William Davis character's story. I wanted to bring his story elements in about his personal life, just to kind of fill in the story, because it was kind of without that. The original version didn't really have that, and I felt that sucked because there was just I didn't want to follow the character. I didn't feel for nobody, and it just kind of was like he was just another member of the crew and didn't have a name or whatever. It was just too empty. So I'm glad I actually went through and added that element of his story and his life. And I could have done James too, his best friend, or his friend on the ship. But I felt, James is just going to get killed off, and I just wanted him to have because when you work some places, sometimes you work with a crew of people, but you only have one of them that's really a friend. And that really explains this story, because that's kind of how it is. because he talks about James the most because that's his only friend, really. And James and him were kind of like outcasts that were picked up in the seaport town before. So they weren't full members, I guess you would say, because it's